My growth into executive leadership required leaving behind certain developmental crutches. Stephanie's voice carried across the mahogany conference table with practiced confidence. I sat in the guest chair at the back of the room, watching my wife of 9 years address the board of directors at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. The invitation had come as a surprise. She'd asked me to witness her promotion to vice president of marketing, calling it a milestone we should share together. Now I understood why. Sometimes you need training wheels to learn to ride, she continued, gesturing toward the presentation screen displaying her career trajectory. But eventually you have to remove them to truly soar. The metaphor hit like a physical blow. Training wheels. In a room full of executives, she was reducing 9 years of my professional coaching to childhood bicycle accessories. Helena Cross, the CEO, leaned forward with interest. Tell us more about this evolution, Stephanie. Your leadership development has been remarkable. Well, Helena, early in my career, I relied heavily on external guidance. Derek here, she gestured casually in my direction, helped me practice the basics. Role-playing difficult conversations, presentation techniques, conflict resolution frameworks. Very structured, very elementary. A few board members glanced back at me with polite acknowledgement. I recognized the look. Spouse of successful executive, probably handled some behind-the-scenes support. They had no idea they were looking at the architect of every leadership method Stephanie was about to claim as her own. But real leadership, Stephanie pressed on, comes from within, from authentic instinct and natural ability. Over the past 18 months, I've discovered my true voice, my own methodologies. She clicked to the next slide, the Coleman Leadership Framework, Innovative Approaches to Team Dynamics. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The Coleman Leadership Framework was my triangle mediation method, developed in 2018 and trademarked through my consulting business. The slide showed my proprietary conflict resolution process, my communication pyramids, my team-building protocols, all rebranded with Stephanie's maiden name. This framework, she explained confidently, represents my natural approach to leadership challenges. It's intuitive, organic, born from real experience rather than textbook theory. The board members nodded approvingly. Helena Cross took notes. The CFO asked thoughtful questions about implementation. And with each response, Stephanie demonstrated a perfect understanding of methodologies I'd spent 15 years developing, presenting them as spontaneous insights that had simply occurred to her. The applause felt like mockery. As the board members congratulated Stephanie on her innovative leadership philosophy, I sat frozen in my chair, processing what I'd just witnessed. This wasn't simply taking credit for my support. This was intellectual property theft on a corporate scale. Derek, you must be so proud, said Richard Hartwell, the board chairman, turning to me with a warm smile. It's wonderful when spouses can grow beyond their initial dynamics. Beyond their initial dynamics. The phrase echoed in my head as I managed a tight smile and nodded. Very proud, I managed to say. Stephanie beamed at the acknowledgement, her confidence radiating across the room. Derek was certainly helpful during my learning phase, she said with practiced generosity. But I think we'd all agree that authentic leadership can't be taught. It has to be discovered from within. Helena Cross stood, extending her hand to Stephanie. Congratulations, VP Coleman. I'm excited to see how you'll implement these methodologies across our client portfolios. The triangle mediation approach alone could revolutionize our conflict resolution services. My triangle mediation approach, the methodology I'd spent 3 years developing after studying industrial psychology at Denver University. The system I'd tested with 47 different corporate clients before refining it into a trademarked process. The framework that had built my reputation as one of Colorado's most effective corporate trainers. Thank you, Helena. I'm confident these natural approaches will drive significant results, Stephanie replied, shaking hands with each board member. As the meeting concluded and people began filing out, Stephanie approached me with the satisfied glow of someone who just achieved a major career milestone. So, she asked, eyes bright with expectation. What did you think? I looked at my wife, really looked at her. The woman I'd spent 9 years coaching through every presentation, every difficult conversation, every leadership challenge. The woman whose confidence I'd built through countless practice sessions in our living room. The woman who was now presenting my life's work as her personal epiphany. Impressive, I said quietly. Very original. She laughed, missing the edge in my voice entirely. I know, right? It's amazing what happens when you stop depending on other people's methods and trust your own instincts. The drive home through Denver's late afternoon traffic gave me time to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Stephanie chattered excitedly about her new corner office, her increased salary, her expanded responsibilities. I made appropriate sounds of encouragement while my mind cataloged every stolen methodology she'd presented as original innovation. The best part, she continued, is that Helena mentioned they're considering me for the regional expansion project. Can you imagine? Leading the rollout across 5 states, implementing my frameworks with major Fortune 500 clients. My frameworks with my clients. That thought stopped me cold. I pulled into our driveway and sat for a moment, engine running, as a realization crystallized. Over 18 years of corporate training, I'd built relationships across dozens of industries. My client database included executives at companies throughout the region, many of whom would likely be involved in Pinnacle's expansion efforts. Derek, are you coming in? Stephanie had already gotten out of the car and was standing by our front door, keys in hand. Be right there, I called back, my mind already shifting into analytical mode. Inside our house, I headed straight to my home office while Stephanie went to open a bottle of champagne. My client relationship management system contained detailed records of every corporate training contract I'd handled since 2005. Cross-referencing by industry, location, and executive level, I began mapping connections. What I discovered was staggering. Madison Pierce, VP of Strategic Development at Global Tech. I'd conducted leadership retreats for her team in 2021. Trevor Walsh, Executive Director at Mountain West Consulting, 3 years of annual training contracts. Sarah Martinez at Denver Financial Group, who'd referred me to 4 other companies after successful conflict resolution workshops. And then I found the connection that changed everything. Helena Cross, Pinnacle Marketing CEO. In my database, Executive Leadership Intensive, October 2022. Client feedback, exceptional frameworks, particularly triangle mediation method, implementing across all management levels. Helena Cross had learned my triangle mediation method directly from me. She'd praised it, implemented it, and 18 months later, she'd just promoted my wife for naturally developing the exact same methodology. I stared at Helena Cross's file on my computer screen, my mind racing through the implications. This wasn't just intellectual property theft, it was fraud on a corporate level. Stephanie had built her promotion on methodologies that Helena Cross knew belonged to me. The champagne cork popped in the kitchen, followed by Stephanie's celebratory laugh. Derek, come celebrate with me. Just finishing up some work, I called back, my fingers already moving across the keyboard. I pulled up my contract files and began documenting everything. Every training session where I'd taught the triangle mediation method, every workshop on conflict resolution pyramids, every seminar on team building protocols that Stephanie had just presented as her natural leadership instincts. The evidence was overwhelming. 47 corporate clients had learned these methodologies directly from me. I had signed contracts, payment records, client testimonials, and most importantly, copyright documentation filed with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office in 2018. My phone buzzed with a text from Franklin Torres, my business partner. Saw the LinkedIn post about Stephanie's promotion. Congrats, drinks Friday? I stared at the message, then typed back. Can you meet tonight instead? Need to discuss something urgent. Everything okay? Professional ethics issue. I'll explain in person. An hour later, Franklin sat in my office reviewing printed copies of Stephanie's presentation materials alongside my copyrighted training documents. His expression grew darker with each page. Derek, this is wholesale intellectual property theft, he said finally. She's not just using your methods. She's claiming she developed them independently. It gets worse, I said, showing him Helena Cross's client file. The CEO who promoted her learned these exact methods from me 18 months ago. Either Helena doesn't remember where she learned the triangle mediation method, or she knows exactly what's happening and doesn't care, Franklin finished. Jesus, Derek, what are you going to do? I looked out my office window at the Denver skyline, where dozens of companies housed executives I'd trained over nearly 2 decades. Executives who knew my work, respected my methodologies, and valued authentic leadership development. I'm going to protect my intellectual property, I said quietly. And I'm going to make sure the corporate training community understands the difference between learned behavior and natural talent. Franklin nodded slowly. You know this could destroy her career. She destroyed her career the moment she decided to present my life's work as her personal epiphany. The Rocky Mountain Leadership Summit was 3 weeks away. I'd been scheduled as a keynote speaker for months, invited to present on intellectual property protection and corporate training. At the time, it had seemed like a natural topic for someone who'd built a reputation on proprietary methodologies. Now it felt like destiny. Franklin helped me refine the presentation over the next week. We built a comprehensive case study around anonymous methodology appropriation, using Stephanie's stolen frameworks as our primary example. The presentation would demonstrate how original training concepts could be identified through documentation, copyright records, and client testimonials. "You're really going to do this publicly?" Franklin asked as we reviewed the final slides. 400 industry professionals will be in that audience, I replied, including at least 30 executives I've trained personally. If someone is going to present my work as their own innovation, they should be prepared to defend that claim in front of the people who learned it from me. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I wouldn't need to mention Stephanie by name or make personal accusations. I would simply present the triangle mediation method, the conflict resolution pyramids, and the team-building protocols as my copyrighted work, which they were. If Stephanie chose to continue claiming she'd developed them independently, she'd be forced to either admit the theft or maintain an obviously false position. I registered Stephanie for the conference as my guest. "Thought you might want to attend," I told her over dinner. "Good networking opportunity for your new position." Her eyes lit up. "That's perfect timing!" Helena mentioned that several potential clients will be there. I could showcase the Coleman Leadership Framework to a wider audience. "The Coleman Leadership Framework," I repeated neutrally. "Your original work." "Exactly," she said with confidence. "Helena thinks it could become a signature offering for Pinnacle. She's already talking about me presenting it at industry conferences." I nodded and took another bite of my dinner, saying nothing about the fact that she'd be presenting it at an industry conference in less than 3 weeks, right after I demonstrated its actual origins to 400 of her potential colleagues. 2 days before the conference, Madison Pierce called me directly. "Derek, I'm looking forward to your presentation on Friday," she said. "Intellectual property protection is becoming a huge issue in our industry. Too many people claiming credit for methodologies they learned elsewhere. It's a problem that needs addressing," I agreed. "Authentic leadership development requires authentic attribution." "Absolutely. By the way, I'll be sitting with Helena Cross and several other executives from Pinnacle Marketing. Should be interesting to see your perspective on methodology ownership." After I hung up, I realized that Madison had essentially confirmed what I suspected. The corporate training community was smaller than most people realized, and reputation traveled fast. The Colorado Convention Center buzzed with 400 corporate training professionals, executives, and leadership development specialists. I stood backstage reviewing my presentation notes one final time. In 20 minutes, I would deliver what might be the most important presentation of my career. Stephanie sat in the third row, radiant in her new executive attire, surrounded by colleagues from Pinnacle Marketing. Helena Cross was positioned at a front table with Madison Pierce and several other industry leaders I recognized from my client files. The irony was perfect. Half my audience consisted of people I'd personally trained in the methodologies I was about to reclaim. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conference moderator announced, "please welcome Derek Morrison, Senior Partner at Morrison & Associates Corporate Training, presenting Intellectual Property Protection in Leadership Development, a case study in methodology attribution." I walked to the podium with the quiet confidence that comes from absolute certainty in your position. The presentation screen displayed my opening slide, "Protecting Original Work in a Collaborative Industry." "Thank you," I began, scanning the audience. My eyes briefly met Stephanie's. She looked proud and expectant, completely unaware of what was coming. How many of you have attended training sessions where you learned frameworks so effective, so elegant that you incorporated them into your own leadership style? Hands went up throughout the audience, including Helena Cross's. Excellent. Learning from others is the foundation of professional development. But what happens when learned methodologies are presented as original innovations? When someone claims they independently developed techniques they actually learned from someone else? I clicked to the next slide, Case Study, the Triangle Mediation Method. The audience leaned forward with interest. This was my signature framework, known throughout the Colorado corporate training community. In the third row, I saw Stephanie's confident smile falter slightly. "The Triangle Mediation Method," I continued, "was developed in 2018 after 3 years of research into industrial psychology and conflict resolution. It's been taught to 47 corporate clients across multiple industries, trademarked through the U.S. Patent Office and documented through extensive client feedback." Helena Cross was taking notes, her expression focused. Madison Pierce glanced toward Stephanie's table with what looked like growing realization. "Now," I said, advancing to the next slide, Imagine discovering that someone has rebranded this copyrighted methodology as their own innovation, presented it to corporate boards as evidence of their natural leadership instincts, used it as justification for executive promotion. The room grew very quiet. I could see executives throughout the audience exchanging glances, wheels turning as they connected my words to recent industry developments they might have witnessed. The question becomes, how do we protect intellectual property while maintaining the collaborative spirit that makes our industry strong? I clicked to my next slide, recognizing methodology appropriation. The screen displayed side-by-side frameworks, my original triangle mediation method on the left, and on the right, an identical structure labeled the Coleman Leadership Framework. A murmur rippled through the audience. Helena Cross's pen stopped moving. Madison Pierce sat back in her chair, her expression shifting from interest to concern. At the Pinnacle marketing table, I watched the color drain from Stephanie's face. When reviewing potential intellectual property violations, I continued, we look for several indicators. First, identical structural elements in supposedly independent methodologies. I highlighted the matching components, the three-point conflict analysis, the resolution pyramid, the follow-up protocols. Every element was perfectly aligned between the two frameworks. Second, we examined timeline discrepancies. The original triangle mediation method was copyrighted in 2018 and has been taught consistently since then. The Coleman Leadership Framework appeared publicly for the first time last month. Trevor Walsh, seated near the back, raised his hand. Derek, that's a remarkably similar framework structure. Have you encountered situations where your clients accidentally replicated your methods? Excellent question, Trevor. And yes, it's natural for people who've learned effective methodologies to unconsciously incorporate them into their own practice. The key distinction is conscious attribution versus explicit claims of original development. I advance to the next slide, client documentation and testimony. The screen filled with testimonials from executives who'd learned the triangle mediation method directly from me, including several people sitting in this very audience. Helena Cross, CEO of Pinnacle Marketing, wrote this after our October 2022 Leadership Intensive. Exceptional frameworks, particularly the triangle mediation method. We're implementing this across all management levels. Helena Cross went rigid in her seat. Around her, other executives turned to look at her, then toward Stephanie's table. The connection was becoming impossible to ignore. The challenge for our industry, I said, maintaining a professional tone, is that intellectual property theft damages everyone. It devalues original research, discourages innovation, and creates unfair competitive advantages for those willing to present others' work as their own. I paused, letting the weight of that statement settle across the room. So I'm proposing a new initiative, the Corporate Training Authenticity Pledge. A commitment to proper attribution, transparent methodology sourcing, and ethical leadership development practices. Applause began scattered through the audience, building to a sustained ovation, but I noticed the Pinnacle marketing table remained conspicuously quiet. Thank you, I concluded. I'll be available for questions during the networking session. As I stepped away from the podium, I saw Stephanie rush from her seat toward the exit. Helena Cross was surrounded by other executives, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to concerned. The professional reckoning had begun. I found Stephanie in the convention center parking garage, leaning against our car with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice carried across the concrete space, tight with barely controlled panic. Helena, please, you have to understand. I can explain this, she was saying. It's not what it looks like. She noticed me approaching and quickly ended the call. Derek, she said, her professional composure cracking. What the hell was that presentation about? Intellectual property protection, I replied calmly. Exactly what was advertised. You humiliated me in front of 400 people. In front of my CEO, my colleagues, potential clients. I unlocked the car and opened the driver's door. I presented a case study about methodology appropriation. If you felt humiliated, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Don't play games with me. Her voice rose, echoing off the concrete walls. You deliberately sabotaged my presentation, my promotion, my career. Your presentation? I turned to face her fully. Stephanie, you presented my copyrighted methodologies as your original work. In front of the CEO who learned those exact methods from me 18 months ago. What did you think was going to happen? For the first time since I'd known her, Stephanie looked genuinely lost. The confident executive facade had completely disappeared, replaced by someone scrambling to understand how their careful plans had collapsed so spectacularly. I adapted your methods, she said weakly. I made them my own. You rebranded them. There's a difference. I got into the car. Are you coming, or do you need more time to explain to Helena how you independently developed techniques she learned from me in 2022? The drive home was silent except for the continuous buzzing of Stephanie's phone. Text messages, missed calls, LinkedIn notifications. The corporate training community was clearly responding to my presentation with considerable interest. Finally, Stephanie spoke. What do you want, Derek? I want proper attribution for my work. I want the corporate training community to understand the importance of intellectual property protection. And I want you to stop presenting my life's work as evidence of your natural leadership abilities. You could have talked to me privately. We could have worked something out. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. Like we worked out your decision to call me training wheels in front of the board. Like we worked out your claim that real leadership comes from within, not from textbook theory. She stared at me, finally beginning to understand the scope of what she'd done. This isn't just about the methodologies, is it? She said quietly. No, Stephanie, this is about respect. This is about recognizing that partnership means acknowledging what your partner contributes. This is about the difference between growth and theft. Monday morning brought the consequences I'd anticipated. My phone rang at 7:30 a.m., Madison Pierce calling from Global Tech. Derek, I wanted to give you a heads up, she said without preamble. Helena Cross called me last night. She's concerned about the intellectual property implications of Stephanie's promotion. I imagine she would be. Look, I've known you for 6 years. Your integrity is unquestioned in this industry. But this situation puts Helena in a difficult position. If Pinnacle Marketing promoted someone based on stolen methodologies, there could be liability issues. After hanging up, I checked my email. 3 more inquiries from executives who'd attended the conference asking about methodology licensing and authenticity verification. The corporate training community was clearly taking the intellectual property issue seriously. At 10:15, Franklin called with an update from his network. Derek, you need to know. The Professional Coaching Certification Board received a formal complaint this morning. Someone reported potential ethics violations related to methodology appropriation. Who filed the complaint? Helena Cross. The irony was stunning. Helena, faced with the liability of having promoted someone for stolen work, was now covering herself by reporting the theft to the Industry Oversight Board. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. Emergency meeting with HR at 2 p.m. They're asking about my methodology development process. What should I tell them? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, tell them the truth. At 3:30, another text arrived. They're requiring me to provide documentation of independent development for all frameworks I've claimed. How do I prove something I can't prove? The answer, of course, was that she couldn't. You can't provide evidence of independent development when the work wasn't independently developed. Over the next week, the requests became increasingly desperate. Derek, please, I need your help. They're threatening to revoke my promotion. The board wants to meet with you. Will you verify that I contributed to the methodology development? Helena is furious. She says I misrepresented my qualifications. Can we say we co-developed the frameworks? But the damage was spreading beyond Pinnacle Marketing. Trevor Walsh called to inform me that 3 companies were now requiring authenticity verification for any leadership frameworks presented by potential consultants. Sarah Martinez from Denver Financial Group mentioned that her company was implementing new policies around intellectual property attribution. The corporate training authenticity pledge I'd proposed at the conference was gaining traction throughout the industry. 43 training professionals had already signed on, committing to transparent methodology sourcing and proper attribution practices. My business, meanwhile, was experiencing unprecedented demand. Companies wanted to ensure their leadership development programs were built on authentic, properly attributed methodologies. My calendar was booking 3 months out. On Friday afternoon, Stephanie came home early. She found me in my office reviewing contract proposals from new clients. They demoted me, she said quietly from the doorway. Back to regional marketing manager. $52,000 salary cut. I looked up from my computer. I'm sorry to hear that. Helena said they can't risk having someone in a VP position who misrepresented their qualifications to the board. 6 months later, I stood before another conference audience, this time at the National Corporate Training Summit in Chicago. The invitation had come from the industry's most prestigious organization, asking me to deliver the keynote address on ethical leadership development in the modern era. The audience was larger this time, nearly 800 training professionals, executives, and leadership development specialists from across the country. My presentation focused on the positive outcomes of the Authenticity Initiative, how proper attribution had strengthened the industry rather than weakening it. The corporate training authenticity pledge now has over 300 signatories, I announced to sustained applause. Companies are investing more in original leadership development, trainers are collaborating more effectively, and we've seen a significant increase in innovative methodology development. In the front row, Helena Cross sat taking notes. After the demotion crisis at Pinnacle Marketing, she'd reached out to license my methodologies properly and had become one of the pledge's most vocal supporters. Her company's reputation had actually strengthened when she demonstrated their commitment to ethical practices. The case study that sparked this initiative, I continued, demonstrated something important. Authentic leadership development requires authentic attribution. When we build on others' work, and we all do, acknowledging that foundation strengthens rather than weakens our position. After my presentation, I was approached by a reporter from Training Industry magazine. Mr. Morrison, has there been any long-term fallout from the intellectual property case that started your authenticity campaign? The individual involved has found new opportunities better suited to her actual skill set, I replied diplomatically. Sometimes professional setbacks redirect us toward more appropriate career paths. It was true. Stephanie had eventually left Pinnacle Marketing and taken a position as a sales coordinator at a smaller firm. Her LinkedIn profile now listed her responsibilities honestly, supporting executive team initiatives and coordinating client communications. No mention of leadership frameworks or methodology development. We'd divorced 6 months after the conference incident. The proceedings were surprisingly amicable. Stephanie seemed to understand that fighting someone who'd just become an industry leader in professional ethics would likely backfire spectacularly. Franklin met me at the airport for the flight back to Denver. So, how does it feel to be the most respected voice in corporate training ethics? He asked as we waited at our gate. Satisfying, I admitted. But the real victory isn't professional recognition. It's knowing that the industry is stronger because people understand the value of authentic contribution. My phone buzzed with a message from Trevor Walsh. Derek saw your keynote online. Brilliant as always. Question: would you be interested in developing a certification program for methodology attribution? 3 universities are asking. I smiled and showed Franklin the message. Looks like there's still work to do. On the plane, I reflected on how much had changed since that boardroom meeting where Stephanie had called me training wheels. She'd been right about one thing. Training wheels do get removed eventually. But she'd misunderstood their purpose entirely. Training wheels aren't meant to be discarded and forgotten. They're meant to provide stability while someone develops the confidence and skills to succeed independently. The goal isn't to pretend they never existed. It's to remember them with gratitude for the foundation they provided. Stephanie had tried to remove her training wheels by denying they'd ever been necessary. I'd simply reminded the world why they'd been important in the first place. As the plane descended toward Denver, I opened my laptop to review proposals for my next project. A comprehensive guide to ethical leadership development that would set industry standards for years to come. The final chapter would be dedicated to a simple principle I'd learned through hard experience. Authentic leadership requires authentic attribution. Some lessons, it turns out, are worth teaching more than once.